Close your eyes and imagine a world where you wouldn't have to ride a plane, a boat, or a car to be able to go to places. This is what world literature can do. It can take you places without having to leave. All you have to do is pick up a book and let your imagination run wild. So, what is world literature? It is a way of communicating and perceiving important details of culture, traditions, and attitudes. It is comprised of language and knowledge is a form of communication. World literature is a totality of all national literatures. Now that we know what it's all about, and let's discuss how important world literature is. First, it expands our horizon because when we study literature, our horizons are broadened. We can learn about and come to understand people who are different from us. Reading world literature allows people to develop new ideas and have ethical standpoint. It allows us to understand ourselves, each other, and the world around us better. Second, it gives us an opportunity to take a look in the past. Literature is also a form of time travel that tells us put today in the context to be able to read about how people wise in the past. We can really make us appreciate what humanity is able to accomplish and endure. Literature is a valuable source of cultural knowledge of centuries. People would express what their opinion on what certain things are about, and they would document news events. These texts are seen as a reflection of a nation's cultures and lastly, appreciation for other cultures and neighbors. That world literature is used as medium to put it towards the cultures and beliefs that can reach every corner of the world to know about this is specific area in obtaining knowledge of the cultures and beliefs of a place. We would learn how to respect and accept diversity. Literature provides readers the culture of a specific community. It is represent of a personal voice of a culture that world literature is important to an eye-opener. It reaches hearts all over the world. It is a medium to spread awareness. And that is what world literature is. The world of the text. The world in front of the text considers how the interpretation of the text relates to the readers. Social and cultural context. This perspective may also be referred to hermeneutics, sources that relate the biblical text to the modern readers. Next is the author's rule. He is the one is the source of some form of intellectual, of creative work, especially one who composes a book, article, poem, play, or other literary work intended for publication. And these are the example: humanity, divinity, pride, and manners. Modes of reading. Agent and author Evan Marshall identifies the five fiction writing modes: action, summary, dialogue, feelings or thoughts, and background analytical, study, general, scheming, and scanning. Next is what is a novel? A novel is a relatively long work of narrative fiction, typically written in a prose and published in a book. It is also a fictitious prose narrative of book length, typically representing character and action with some degree of realism. And next is the reading across time. This chapter explores the kinds of continuity and change people can encounter over time, as stories and metaphors evolve across centuries and language within a varied but broadly connected tradition. It begins by tracing the development of the Western epic tradition from its earliest manifestations onward, looking at the interplay of oral tradition and literary and a changing representation of the ghosts and of the underworld. Next is the orature to literature. Orature means oral literature, stories wherein written They were told and spread by the word of mouth passed between generations. Next is the human and the divine. To err is human, to forgive. Divines means that everyone makes mistakes, but we should try to be like God and forgive one another. The relationship between the self and the divine power of God is the self, that reflection of God within us, which is the Spirit, which resides in our heart normally. And the divine power of God is the power of God, which is His loves, desires, activates, creates, and evolves. It involves human beings after creating them to such a point that they can feel this power through the connection of the Spirit. When you get connected to the Spirit, then only you can feel anything, because the one that can feel His power is your spirit. But the spirit in the human consciousness is not conscious, means you cannot feel it on your central nervous system. But once you are realized, it starts acting in your central nervous system, and that's why you can feel it all around you. Next is the Underworld Dreams. The characters in these stories have relatable desires, but they have supernatural forces working against them. Often in the periphery, in the monkey coat, June has a bad luck since David, the father of their daughter Ivy, left unexpectedly. Her fortune gets worse when she finds a family heirloom in the storage shed. A coat make a monkey's fur after she starts wearing it. Her relationship with others take a bad turn and eventually goes missing, leaving in the coat, and perhaps a curse for Ivy. Next is the Feminizing Homer. Homer is the presumed author of the Iliad and the Odyssey, two hugely influential epic poems in ancient Greeks. If Homer did in fact compose the works, he is the one of the greatest literary artists in the world, and through these poems, he affected Western standards and ideas. Next is the Gathering Rosebuds. Is a proverb: act and enjoy yourself now, before your situation changes. The line comes from Robert Herrick's 17th century poem, To the Virgins to Make Much of Time, and is an example of carpe diem. The poem is about making the most of one time, but it's also about the passage of time and the fact between us we get older, we change. Next is the reading across cultures. The strategies in communicating across culture is also to study their cultures and values. Always practice or show the correct and right values, and have long patience when communicating with people from different countries. When talking with them, avoid slang and jargon, as it could cause misunderstanding between the two of you. Talk slowly, keep your words simple, and write your message down whatever suits or whatever you are comfortable with, that can surely pass your clear and accurate message to that person. Next is the classical drama, the Greece and the India. The term Indian classical drama refers to the tradition of dramatic literature and performance in ancient India. The origin of dramatic performance in the Indian subcontinent can be traced back to as early as 200 BCE. Its drama is regarded as the highest achievement of Sanskrit literature, while the ancient Greeks took their entertainment very seriously and used drama as a way of investigating the world they lived in, and it meant to be human. These genres of drama were comedy, satyr plays, and most of important of all is the tragedy. The first master of comedy was playwright Aristophanes. Next is the tragic flow or fate. It is a literary device that is used by writers to complicate their characters. Flaws include pride, envy, and cowardice. It usually appears in plays and novels, but can also be used in longer narrative poems and prose poems. Next is the character and the plot. Character is a person or animal or really anything personified. There can be one character or many, and often there are secondary characters, but not always. While the plot consists of the events that happened in the story. Next is the scenes from middle class life. People walk past a graffiti displayed on the wall on Ankara's famous Tunali Helmi Avenue in Kankaya, district of Ankara, Turkey on August 6, 2019. This upper middle class district, which is the most populated district in the Turkish capital and also in the country, is also a stronghold of the main opposition Republican People's Party during the elections. Next is the peripheral reading. When you use your peripheral vision to read, you look in the space between two words instead of looking specific words, trying to read both words and then moving your eyes to the next pair of words. Next is the reading in Rayo. It's a new trail for misunderstanding the cultural of history of 19th century of Brazil. And let's move to the reading in transitions. The transitional readers, sometimes referred to as intermediate or nearby fluent readers, have begun to adopt the reading behaviors that will allow them to progress towards more advanced reading skills. Metaphase is literal word forward translation. Paraphrase follows the scenes of the author rather than his precise words. Imitation departs from the original at the pressure of the translator and really constructs for a new poem on the basis of the old. Next is the comparing translations. Translation and interpretation defined. Translation deciphers meaning of the written word from one language to another. Interpretation conveys meaning of the spoken word from one language to another. Next is the how foreign should be translation be. Translation helps students to understand their native language better. The process of converting one language to another gives your students unique insight into their own. And how do Spartans speak? Chasunika is based on the Juric language spoken by the ancient Spartans, and it is the only remaining dialect from the Ionic and Attaic dialects on the eastern branch. Next is The Brave New World. Is a dystopian social science fiction novel by English author Aldous Huxley, written in 1931 and published in 1932. The novel examines a futuristic society called the World State that revolves around a science and efficiency. In this society, emotions and individuality are conditioned out of children at a young age, and there are no lasting relationship because everyone belongs to everyone else. Next is The Stranger in a Strange Land, a classical science fiction novel by an American writer, Robert E. Heinlein, published in 1961. The work centers on a human race on Mars who comes to Earth and challenge customs relating to sex, death, religion, and money. Next is The Real World Travels, is to experience things which you wouldn't otherwise. It is to experience the culture of people, understand their traditions, listen to their stories, try out their cuisines, and experience a thing which will stay with you forever as a memory. Next is The Journeying to the West. It's a Chinese novel published in the 16th century during the Ming Dynasty and attributed to Wang Changyin. It is the one of four great classical novels of Chinese literature, is a self-consistent setting with events and often other elements that is different from the real world. It may also be called an imagined, constructed, or fictional realm or world. Next is The Looking Homeward. A Story of the Buried Life is a 1929 novel by Thomas Wolfe. And now, let's move to the Writing the Empire story examines how this powerful theme, empire, has influenced both British and post-colonial consciousness, generally focused either on political features or on physical features. Africa, known as the Dark Continent because it remained unexplored for a fairly long period of time, factors that made it difficult for the explorer to venture in the continent of Africa, where the largest desert acted as a natural barrier for European explorers. Next is the Oedipus. Doesn't stop ruling Thebes after he found out the truth. When the truth came out, Jocasta killed herself, and Oedipus was tortured by the Furies for a while but stayed in charge of the city. Eventually, though he died in battle and was given an honorable burial in Thebes, Ogon or Ogon, known as Ogon or Ogon in Latin America, it is a spirit that appears in several African religions. He was the first Oni of the life after the demise of Oduduwa, a warrior and a powerful spirit of metal work, as well as of ram and drum making. For the title of Candid has been translated as Candid, or all of the best, and Candid, or the optimist. Candid learns the principles of optimism from his mentor, Pangloss, and one of the central tenets of his philosophy is that since everything was made for a purpose, is necessarily for the best purpose. Said or Said Arabic is a male Arabic given name which means happy and patient. Said or Sid is a spelling used in most Latin language. Next is the Peace Optimist, is a genealogy of three archetypes of Arabic literature going back to the 8th century. The Peresky hero, the fool, the traitor, or informer. The Peace Optimist refers to the inseparability of hope and despair under untenable historical conditions. Next is a collection of 6 novellas by charismatic writer Chang, the first published in the 1930s and 40s in China. Her stories are about love, longing, troubled family lives, and the political and sexual ambiguity against the background of social constraints or upheavals. Next is the global warming. Globalization, the simultaneous occurrence of both universalizing and particularizing tendencies in contemporary social, political, and economic system. Localization emerged as a countercurrent to globalization. Localization is also the primary means through which localities respond to the challenge of globalization, namely by mobilizing local resources to couple with global networks and furthering the local embeddedness of foreign corporations. Let's move to the epilogue, the changing concept of the world literature. Most discussion of the world literature mention at some point or other the German term world literature and trace the origin of the concept of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, though Goethe was not the first to use the term in German, given his great reputation and influence on the European cultural scenes. In the Price's remarks, it is Goethe to whom credit must be given for creating the paradigm that became a significant, widely debated element in critical and pedagogical literary discourse. Pricer hopefully situates Goethe's concept in its historical context, in which Germany was not politically unified and all European nations, after the divisive Napoleonic Wars, were badly in need of mutual understanding and peace coexistence. In some sense, that was a situation not so very different from our world today, in which globalizing tendencies in economics, communication, scientific, and technological development coexist with many communities intensifying groups on ethnic or national identities, even the resurgence of the tenacious tribalisms. Theoretically speaking, the tension between two opposite forces was always resided, and while literature is a concept which stands poised between the local and the global nation, specificities and cosmopolitan claims to literary universality with regard to God's own understanding.